All righty. So we are uh, we're on take two now. We're looking at chapter 7 today. We're going to be looking at balance training and reactive training. So basically conceptually, we've been working our way through like an OPT template, right? Oops, I closed it. We've been going through the warm-up section where we covered like flexibility and cardio. And then we started to get into the movement prep where we did the core part yesterday. And then now we are taking a look at balance and reactive training today. So today we're going to finish up the movement prep. You can think of movement prep basically as the post warm-up pre-workout section of a training session, right? Or of a workout routine or whatever you want to call it. And so, it's not necessarily, warming up. Like by this point, you want to make sure you are warmed up going into your movement prep because it is still like somewhat intensive. Um, you want to have your core tissue temperature up and stuff. But the way I like to think about it is, if you look at like what a corrective exercise specialist does, like you guys are all walking away with your CES once you get through everything. The whole CES process, like if I just pull this up here, NASM CEX model, is that what they call it? A model? um, Continuum, they call it a continuum. If you take a look at the CEX continuum, right, of the corrective exercise specialist, the whole idea here is this is basically breaking down more in detail exactly what a personal trainer does, right? And don't be wrong, like not every trainer, like some trainers are there just to make people burn a lot of calories, and that's great, I think that fits well within the realm of like group exercise instructor. They're not necessarily addressing individual problems, right? But what we're going to do is we are analyzing people's posture and we're breaking things down in sort of this 4-step process, right? We inhibit their overactive muscles to get them to stop firing too much. Then we lengthen them to make sure that they don't start turning back on and refiring too much again. So we do all that to our overactive muscles. We inhibit them and then we lengthen them. Then we go flip to the other side of the opposite, we flip to the opposite side of the joint and we activate our weakened or underactive muscles. And then we integrate those underactive or muscles. We integrate them with the rest of our body. We teach them how to kind of work in conjunction with everything. So if you think about like what we've been doing so far as we're working our way through an OPT template, we've been going through the warm-up section, which is where you're going to address the overactive muscles. It consists of like SMR and it consists of like stretching techniques, right? Followed by a little bit of like cardio, warming up. Typing is hard apparently. So we're covering like a little bit of flexibility, through SMR, which is an inhibiting technique. Then we followed up with a little bit of stretching, which is a lengthening technique. Now we are going to jump straight to the other side of the joint where we're going to get into activating underactive muscles. So for core stuff, this is where we see a lot of underactive lumbopelvic hip muscles, usually in like the local stabilization system, whether that's on, the front side of things in the transverse abdominis or the internal obliques, or, whether it's on the back side of things, such as like your multifidus or, gluteal muscles or things like that. So we're looking at like the local and global stabilization systems, right? We're really trying to get the core muscles turned on. So we are activating those things. Well, today we're looking at balance training and reactive training. A lot of balance exercises are going to involve, recruiting muscles in such a way that you are going to activate your underactive muscles, right? You're going to activate and get them turned on. That's going to allow you to more efficiently integrate those muscles once we get down here into the sort of meat and potatoes part of the workout. Like when I get into, let's say it's upper back day, right? Or maybe just a total body workout, but I happen to have like pull-ups in my routine, right? Well, if I have like overactive lat muscles, pull-ups are actually, I'm likely to do those and make that lat muscle even further overactive rather than stabilizing through my rotator cuff. So what you'll see when you see people do that kind of pull up is you'll see this kind of thing. I'm just going to look up a picture of a pull up because I don't know how to look this up with really bad form, actually. For the record, this is great. She is like straight up and down. Let's see here. Let's try pull up bad form. Oh, there we go. Yeah, you kind of see this sort of thing. So actually, you know what? That's not too bad. I really want like an exaggerated one. Yeah, there we go. This is what I'm looking for. So you'll see this kind of thing where like his body comes really far forward here so that it becomes a little bit more of a rowing action instead of a shoulder adduction. Instead of like pulling down, he's kind of rowing like this. And what's happening there is, he's using core muscles, right? Or we're seeing like this kind of thing, like this over exaggerated kind of arch here, right? And what we're seeing, the reason that that is happening is because there are overactive muscles that are inhibiting his underactive muscles. He's not pulling the way he's supposed to. His core muscles are firing rather than stabilizing. And that's causing his weight to shift forward. Then he's using his lats to perform shoulder extension rather than shoulder adduction, right? So it's not always just in the core. Sometimes it is in that movement system where we see this kind of thing. So if I did something to activate the right part of my upper back, before I get into my workout, like my main, resistance section is going to have something like pull-ups. If I did something which is like a balance exercise, like a single leg lift and chop, right? Like I've got a medicine ball in hand, I'm standing on one leg and I'm lifting like this and then bringing that back down. That's actually giving me an opportunity to activate some of my rotator cuff shoulder muscles and stabilizer muscles in my core. And that will hopefully make my form better once I get to my meat and potatoes, right? Once I get to the main course of my workout. So we are finishing up that movement prep stuff today. We talked about the core. Now let's get into the balance stuff. So balance, our objectives here, we want to describe the rationale for balance training, sort of the purposes behind it, and then be able to effectively kind of write a good, balance program. God dang it, I got this freaking callus. I need to sandpaper this down. So we've got, if we're looking at like sort of defining balance, right? Balance is going to be defined as how far outside of your base of support you are able to maintain equilibrium, without like losing your balance, basically. So you guys might remember when we were talking about like we were talking about fitness assessments. We talked about the STAR excursion assessment, which is a really great assessment that you'll sometimes see where you are basically testing your level of balance, right? You stand on a mat like this, you reach out as far as you can with each leg, and then you switch sides and do the same thing. Some of it you're crossing over your hip. And so here you can see in this version right here, if it'll load properly. God, I'm worried my internet's bad again. I feel like this should have loaded in unpixelated, but whatever. You can see this version right here. Their left leg and their right leg, look at how much wider the standing on their left leg circle is versus standing on their right leg circle. Like this one's pretty comparable, right? They actually reached, not too bad in both directions here, right? Like this is mirroring this pretty closely. Like this one's still further. Like if they're standing on our left and they reach, away to the opposite side, they got all the way to the end of the mat. Whereas this version, they got pretty close to the end of the mat, but not quite all the way. But then look at how much better it is on this side, right? As they cross over the midline, they got all the way, pretty much almost to the end again. But over here, they only got about halfway. So, or maybe 3/4 of the way versus halfway. So you can definitely see there's better balance on their left leg than there is on their right. Well, that is the way that we know that's their balance, is because that's how far outside of their base of support they are able to reach, right? While maintaining equilibrium. So we're looking at how far they can reach away without, having to take their leg down. So that's our definition of balance, right? Now, we attain balance, we maintain our balance, we keep it through We call it sensory motor control, your brain basically taking information in and remembering what it has done in the past, and integrating all that information together to execute like an appropriate response. And we get it through neuromuscular efficiency and proprioception. When we're talking about like neuromuscular efficiency, what we're talking about is your nervous system's ability to recruit the right muscle at the right time for the right amount of force in the right plane of motion. Basically, it's allowing all of your muscles to work together the way that they are supposed to, optimally, right? If I recruit the right muscle a half a second too late, I'm probably going to lose my balance. Or if I recruit the wrong muscle at exactly the right time, doesn't really matter. It's the wrong muscle, right? And then that muscle is going to turn and make me fire, right? This is one of the reasons why we do the single leg squat assessment. When you're doing the single leg squat assessment, take a look at my knee here, right? If we see it buckle inwards, that's the wrong muscle firing at the right time. Like I'm using my adductors instead of my glutes. And so that's causing me to move in a way that is not very efficient. I have poor neuromuscular efficiency, okay? That's basically what we're constantly training for, is to develop neuromuscular efficiency. Someone who can recruit the right muscles at the right time is going to be much more efficient and less injury prone than someone who cannot. And then we are also looking at proprioception. Your balance is also very much achieved by your body's understanding of where it is in space. Now, I will say we're seeing a sort of the PES's definition of proprioception here. You'll sometimes see this version as like a definition, but it says the cumulative neural input from all proprioceptors. Like basically that means that like any proprioceptor you've got in your body, whether that is a Golgi tendon organ or a muscle spindle or a pacinian corpuscle, all these weird funky names, all the sensory receptors you've got, it's all the information coming in from those to tell your brain like what position it's in. I always like to use the duck analogy when I'm describing proprioception. Like if I had an animal in a box and I told you it's got feathers and a bill and it goes quack, and there's a famous cartoon character named Daffy after it, like chances are you're going to figure out that it's a duck. You're going to take all those pieces of information, run it across your little Rolodex of info that you've got stored in your brain and go, oh, that means it's a duck, right? Your brain does the same thing. It's like if your adductor's at this length and there's this much tension on this joint here and there's this much pressure on this joint here and we're feeling this level of stretch here, your brain goes, da, 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 da. Oh, we are in elbow flexion, right? And it takes all of that, and kind of puts it all together. So that's what your proprioception is. It's your body's ability to sense the position of adjacent body parts to understand what position it's in and where it is in space. How many times have you guys had altered proprioception where you've kind of noticed that you've got altered proprioception? I don't know about you, but I've noticed this a few times. Like the other day, I was walking by like a storefront window, and it was just like a tense day, and I was like looking over, and I was like, "Good God!" I was like, like, just like posture, just like walking around like this. I was like, "Man, I've been sitting too much lately." Like I can tell my posture isn't exactly the way I want it to be. And so I got a little self-conscious there, I felt like I was standing the way I normally stand, but I noticed that my posture just definitely wasn't in the position I wanted it to be in. So I had altered my proprioception without even really realizing it. So where do we get our balance from? Well, there's a couple different places you're going to get your balance from. Nassim's going to break this down a little bit differently than the way I like to break it down. I like to think of your balance basically in 3 spots in your body. It is going to be the bottom of your foot. Your foot strength is actually huge when it comes to balance. It is also going to be your core, which is your dead center for pretty much everything in your entire body. That's going to tell you, how to maintain your balance. And it's also going to be in your inner ear, which we don't really have much control over. But basically, you have this system called your vestibular system, which is basically, if we look at it, it is this hollow network of tubes inside your ear. And if you've ever known somebody who has vertigo, what they are dealing with is where this vestibular system got altered basically. And so your body actually keeps these little stones inside these little hollow tubes here, and there's some fluid in there. And based on like how those stones are kind of resting and floating around in that fluid, your body is kind of able to understand which way is up and which way is down and what orientation the world is in. And so it kind of honestly acts like it kind of looks like one of those woodworking levels, like where you're trying to like basically balance out the little bubble, that's kind of how your vestibular system acts. Now, we're not necessarily able to like train that directly, but through balance training, your brain uses sensory motor integration to put that together. It says, oh, okay, I'm starting to kind of, remember like the orientation of things. And so, obviously that can get messed up. It is not really something that we as trainers can fix. That's something that usually requires like a doctor, a physical therapist. They have a series of techniques that they can do to try to get those stones kind of back into place, where you basically roll the client around in this very specific order of movements. I can't remember what the technique is called, but basically kind of gets things back to normal. You can get this from, impact to the head, like a concussion, for instance, can cause this, or even just like a really bad like ear infection can cause this. So definitely something to be aware of.
Air and water.
What's that?
Air and water. For me, the air,
yeah.
if air gets blown in, and water will displace the calcium deposits.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Going swimming can be risky for people with vertigo. And like, or even getting on an airplane. I think like pressure changes can move it around, if I'm not mistaken. And it's rough, man. It makes people nauseous. It feel, because you cannot tell what is up and what is down, so your balance is completely thrown off. If you ever have a client with vertigo, which will happen probably at some point in your career, honestly, you actually treat it very similar to clients who have high blood pressure. Basically, the trick is just to make sure that you don't change the orientation of their head too quickly. With clients who have high blood pressure, we don't want to make them do things where they're going like this, right? Because what that can do is like, their blood pressure, right? They're going to have a hard time getting blood back to the brain. If we throw it all over here, it's going to have a hard time getting back over there. And so all of a sudden they'll get lightheaded and they might feel like they're going to pass out, or faint, or they'll get nauseous, right? Same thing is true of clients with vertigo. So basically, if you're ever training someone with vertigo, the trick is basically just to make sure that you keep the orientation of their head upright the entire time. So crunches are kind of out of the order. Instead, even like laying down chest press exercises are not really a great choice. You can do it. It depends on like the severity, but you got to be really cautious about how quickly they get up. If you decide to do like a chest pressing exercise, you should probably do like a seated chest press machine or a cable chest press. I find that incline is okay. It's not quite a big enough change. So little things like that. But like inverted rows, even push-ups, planks, that's a tough one because we love planks. But generally, if you've got a client with vertigo, I will usually do like a plank on a ball, which is great because that's also very good for their balance and stabilization. But I will usually do I will do like a very overly inflated ball. I'll go with one of the really, really large ones, and basically keep them at an angle like this. And that way they don't have to change the orientation of their head too much. Not this version. But that can sometimes, be a little bit of a challenge that you got to be aware of. And it's going to affect their balance. So you get your balance visually, you get it vestibularly, that's the inner ear, and you get it from your proprioception, right? Again, your body kind of sensing its relative adjacent positions. So again, we are aiming for neuromuscular efficiency. This is our main goal when it comes to why we are doing balance training, right? We are trying to develop neuromuscular efficiency. Not only will that improve your balance, it'll improve everything, I'm sure that you guys know some of those people who are just natural athletes, Like they're just naturally well coordinated. They've got good hand-eye coordination. You know, they've never tried something before. They're kind of just gifted at it right away, right? Those are people with excellent neuromuscular efficiency. They have really good bodily control because they know how to recruit the right muscles at the right time for the right amount of force. You know, and so like we are looking at like integrating all of our muscles working together, and we're also trying to do this in all planes of motion. Again, we don't want to get just really good at moving through one plane of motion. So many exercise routines focus primarily on sagittal training, whereas we want to make sure we're doing frontal plane movements. We want to make sure we're doing transverse movements. You know, these are all the ways that we move around in the world, you know. Whenever I'm talking to people, you know, interviewing like new clients and stuff, and they say, you know, I've worked out, you know, I've had a gym membership for years and stuff. I've never really had a trainer, but I just started getting like aches and pains, and you know, they never hurt themselves while they were in the gym, you know, because I feel like the gym it's almost like it's dangerous enough that people are like on alert, so they're being more careful. People always get hurt gardening, doing like laundry, you know, like, or like I had a client one time tell me when they came to work with me, they tore their rotator cuff. Their daughter was in the passenger seat. They were driving, they parked, and they reached back to get her jacket. And that is where they got like a very sudden pain. You know, it's recruiting the wrong muscles at the right time, or the right muscles at the wrong time, recruiting a muscle in the wrong plane of motion. You know, that's how we get hurt. And that's why, you know, we call it working out, but you know, a better name for call it training. You know, that's what you're doing. You are training, right? You are training for life. You know, like you're getting better at all these movements. And like I said, we are trying to develop our proprioception here. You know, all that information from all those proprioceptors. We are also developing kinesthesia, which is a fun little word here. Kinesthesia is not too different from proprioception, but basically, if proprioception is an understanding of where your body is in space, kinesthesia is awareness of movement. So like, you can think of proprioception as like a snapshot of like what position you are in, and kinesthesia is like the awareness of like movements. I was so looking forward to this morning, and I didn't get to do it. And so I was very, very sad that I didn't get to this part of the lecture where I got to show this clip. This is not actually a lesson on biology, but do you want to see the world's greatest example of low kinesthesia and low proprioception? Angry bites its own ankle. Here is the perfect example of a dog that has no proprioception and no kinesthesia. This dog has the worst body awareness I have ever seen in my life. I'm so sad I only get to just watch this video once. I wanted to show that this morning and I didn't get to, and I was really sad. But that is the classic example of like no proprioception. If that dog knew that it was its own leg, maybe it wouldn't do it. If it was aware of like its own movement, maybe it wouldn't do that, you know? Anyway, not a real biology lesson, but I wanted to show that video. So, so where are we getting all this information from? Like I said, proprioception and kinesthesia are both coming from proprioceptors, right? If this is the cumulative neural input from proprioceptors, we have to remember what proprioceptors are, right? Another name for proprioceptors is mechanoreceptors, right? So you have all kinds of sensor receptors in your body. You've got photoreceptors in your eyes. That's what's telling you what color something is, or you know, what something looks like. You've got audio. Shoot, they're not called audio receptors. Crap. Hold on. What are the receptors? That's not what they're called. They're not called audio receptors. Oh no. Well, all right. There's 4 years of college down the drain. I can't remember what they're called. But you get the ones in your ears. You've got Taste receptors, those are chemoreceptors. The ones in your taste buds, for instance, or the ones in your nose, both are sensing different chemicals. And then the ones that we deal with, which are the ones I don't forget, are mechanoreceptors, right? Those are the ones that are sensing tension. So like how much tension is on a muscle, or whether a muscle is, losing its grip on a bone, like a tendon, for instance. Think tendon and tension. You've got ones that sense length, like your muscle spindle. Their job is to sense the length of something. Their job is to detect distortion of elongation or compression, traction, tension, whatever, right? And so there's ones in your skin. You've got skin receptors. They're actually sensitive to like the stretching of your skin. That's actually giving you a little bit of balance. Now, we don't talk about them too much because we're not really training your skin. In fact, if you think I don't know anything about like your auditory, I know very little about skin. I know how it sweats. I know how hormones are generated, and then like that's it for the integumentary system. Like the rest of it, I've long forgotten. You don't use it, you lose it. But then we've got the muscle ones, right? Like I said, we've got muscle spindles. Muscle spindles are sensitive to the stretching and the rate of stretching. So either how quickly it's happening, and then also like how much stretching is occurring. So what's great is your muscle spindles can actually cause contractions in response. If you overstretch a muscle spindle, it panics and it actually triggers a contraction within your muscle. You've got Golgi tendon organs. Those are the ones that live in the tendon. Their job is to sense the tension in those tendons. So if your tendon is losing its grip on a muscle and it's going to tear off, your Golgi tendon organs are going to freak out and they're going to create a pain signal, right? Just like your muscle spindles will. So again, developing your Golgi tendon organs and developing your muscle spindles will give you more proprioception. This is one of the reasons why it's so important to actually maintain your flexibility levels. Without flexibility, your range of motion and those mechanoreceptors, they become altered. They become like overly sensitive. And they're basically saying, yeah, no, we're at full like range of motion now. You couldn't possibly stretch any further, which actually isn't true. So then your brain goes, oh, well, I guess this is our resting posture, right? When we know it should actually be something more like this. And then there's ones that live in your joints. You actually got a large list here. You've got Ruffini endings, Pacinian endings, Golgi afferents living in the joints there that are slightly different. Nociceptors. Nociceptors live in your joint, and their job is actually to kick on once you reach a certain threshold of pain. You have nociceptors all throughout your entire body. Those are your pain receptors. They don't really activate until you hit like a certain level. So if I start like pinching my skin here, this is fine. But if I really start wrenching down, eventually my nociceptors kind of kick on, right? There's also ones that are living in your ligaments themselves. Their job is to be sensitive to like rotation and stretching and things like that. And all of this is connected to your nervous system. If you experience too much relaxation, or if you get too much tension in either direction, these mechanoreceptors will trigger your nervous system to contract a muscle to either create stability within a joint or to create relaxation in a joint. So if there's so much tension, maybe the right move is just to relax that joint. That's literally how foam rolling and stretching works. Or maybe it is actually to stabilize and tighten a joint. And that's how balance training works. So that's why we're talking about these mechanoreceptors kind of twice in 2 days. There's also kind of a fun one here, which is the anticipatory postural mechanism. This is really fun. This is how your brain will actually activate stabilizer muscles before you even start doing something. So let's see here. Andres, Isaiah, Robert, and Kenny, you guys will remember from our exercise psychology class, actually. We talked a little bit about the science of practice, right? And Lorianne, Bay, and actually that's the end of that list. You guys can look forward to this. We got a really fun day where we'll actually talk about the science of practice and how we can help our clients use practice to get better at things without actually practicing them. So they have actually done studies where they've had people in their mind without an actual piano practice playing the piano. They were beginners who had never done it before, and they took some brief piano lessons. And then one group was told to practice on a real piano, and the other group was told to just simply practice in their imagination. Both groups got better, which is pretty cool. So your nervous system can actually get better at stuff without even physically doing it. Part of that is related to the way that your brain through central nervous system processing. And so there's actually a little bit of an anticipatory postural mechanism that happens. You will notice that like you have much better balance if you just take a second to focus and think about that balance before you even start doing it. So when we start training and we do sets and repeated repetitions of balance training, this can improve your overall balance that way as well. So obviously the rationale behind all of this, we know that like if you have poor joint stability and poor postural control, you're going to end up with faulty movement patterns. Faulty movement patterns leads to decreased performance. Decreased performance leads to possible injury. So with all of that, we need to incorporate balance training, right? We need to try to increase our clients' stability. We need to try to increase our clients' neuromuscular efficiency. And we're going to do all of this through what we call maximal sensory input. And when we say maximal sensory input is we're basically trying to give our nervous system as much information as possible. I like to think of it as teaching my nervous system a really large alphabet or a really large language. Think about like how cool it would be if you had like the Rosetta Stone, right? You could literally speak every language in the world. You'd be able to communicate with anybody on the planet, right? Well, imagine if you taught your nervous system how to control your body in this position, and this position, and this position, and this position, and this position, that one, and this one, this one, that one. If you are doing exercise where, you are wiggling a little bit and you're losing your balance a little bit, you're doing all this kind of stuff, you're getting all this new information all the time. And then your brain goes, I remember how to do that. Oh, I remember how to do that as well. Oh, I know how to deal with that, right? It learns and incorporates that through sensory motor integration. It gets better and better and better at it. You get better at stabilizing, you decrease your risk of injury, and you improve your performance. So this is where there are specific guidelines for balance training. NASM has kind of broken this down in such a way to ensure that like balance is a component of pretty much every workout routine with every client. And it is, like we say, we are taking an integrated training approach. Whenever you hear the word integrated, you got to remember it's systematic, it's progressive, right? Systematic means that we are doing it specifically. Each client is getting exactly the type of routine that they need. And we are always starting with a foundation and building up upon that rather than being like, all right, Kenny, welcome to your first training session. Today, we are doing single leg shoulder presses while you're standing on top of this ball right here. I'm going to put a cup of water on top of your head. I'm going to be shooting flaming arrows at you that you have to dodge, right? That's probably not very good for a first training session, or today we're doing backflips, like probably not the place to start, right? We want to make sure that we're taking an integrated approach. Let's build you from a foundation upwards, right? So systematic, progressive, also always functional, meaning that we're using all planes of motion. And the idea here is that we are stressing the limits of our client's stability. Now, before we get into this, we should always remember, and obviously most of this goes without saying, but it should be challenging, but should always, above all else, be safe. And it should follow NASM's OPT model. Now, when we are talking about progression, the way that you progress things when you are training for balance, you got to remember what it is you are training for, right? Like if I asked your standard exercise enthusiast, or maybe even basic training out there, how you make something harder, 99% of people would go, make it heavier. Maybe, actually, I'll be more fair than that. I'd say probably like 70% of people would say, make it heavier. Maybe you get like an additional like 29% of people that would go do more reps, you know? And both of those answers aren't necessarily wrong, but they are losing sight of maybe the concept of what it is you're training at the time. If we're training for balance, it's not about lifting heavy, it's about lifting stability, right? It's about being more stable. I walked myself into a corner. It's not about lifting heavy. It's about training for better balance, right? And so you're going to do that by stressing your stability and increasing the proprioception of the exercises. So this is where one of the things you guys need to have memorized when we're talking about balance training is this list right here, this balance progression. You need to memorize this, and you need to memorize it in order. So you are going to start by training your client on the floor, which means that's lovely. That's the baseline start of any balance training. The floor isn't increasing the level of instability, right? It is the base foundation version, right? Then you are going to make things ever so slightly harder by putting your client onto a balance beam. Okay, balance beam, which, whenever I Google balance beam, I always get like these gymnast versions. The version that you'll have in a traditional gym, will be just like a stick, kind of like this. That's like $125. That's so ridiculous. It'll like, show me the 2x4 version. It's so funny. This is like such a racket. There you go. This version. Go to the hardware store, get a freaking 2x4, and get a 2x2. I'm sorry, a 4x4, and put that out there. There's your balance beam. Okay. And so like this is the first like progression from the floor. It's still very flat. It's not moving through any planes of motion, right? There's no movement that's occurring in the equipment, but it is changing the visual stimulus just a little bit. And so it is a slight progression from the floor. Then you're going to have your client stand on a half foam roller. And a half foam roller is a foam roller that has been cut in half. So it looks just like this. And you can have your client stand on it like this, where you can see he's actually standing. Actually, you know what? We'll do this. Oh, there we go. We have our client stand on it like this, right? You can do this version. That is very, very stable. There's not a lot of movement that's occurring, but it is limiting the surface area. And then you can make it even harder from there by having them stand on this end instead. And then you can have them stand like front to back like this, or you could have them stand on it side to side like that. Good Lord, whoever this website is really took some great pictures for my lecture. So all of these are actually really, really, really good versions of this. Every one of those works really, really well. And the reason this is the first progression is because the half foam roller is going to move through one plane of motion, right? It is either moving through the frontal plane or it's moving through the sagittal plane, right? And it's only moving through one at a time. Then, once your client has mastered doing that, you can move them onto an RX pad. And an RX pad is this little squishy pad right here, which, by the way, everybody, I really recommend buying one of these and keeping it in your trainer bag. They're literally 20 bucks. Not only is it a really great tool for you to challenge your client's balance, it is also super awesome to have your client kneel on if they're doing like a kneeling hip flexor stretch. And then you can kneel on it if you are doing like a PNF, like hamstring stretch. Like Mo's going to teach you these stretches here, and you're probably going to be in a position. I wouldn't do this like this. I don't really like the straddling version personally. I like to, this version right here. You're probably going to be down on one knee like this, and you do like 5 or 6 sessions in a row, and your knees are going to be begging you for some padding. Buy one of these pads. It is the best $20. You buy it once in your career, or twice if your car gets stolen. So it's great. It's also really great, like I said, for balance training because it is going to move through 2 planes of motion simultaneously. So this is a progression from the half foam, right? Because now it's squishy this way and it's squishy this way simultaneously. So you're getting a little bit of stability in 2 planes of motion at the same time. And finally, you are going to move your client onto the last piece of equipment, which is like a Dynadisc, right? And a Dynadisc is this squishy pad. It's got a textured side and a non-textured side. It's a little easier to stand on the textured side. But basically, you can do it with 2 legs. But if you're doing balance training, chances are you'll be doing it on 1 leg. And now you are going to be able to move through 3 planes of motion. You're going to move sagittally, frontally, and it'll do some spinning. So transverse. You'll also sometimes see like a wobble board or a wobble disc. That's sort of, I didn't know there was like a kid version of this. That looks something kind of like this. It's a hard disc. These are much harder than the Dynadisc. I'd say this is like 1 step upgraded from your classic Dynadisc, and so it's hard plastic. And again, it moves through 3 planes of motion simultaneously. So you need to have that progression memorized. Okay, so floor to balance beam to half foam roller to AirX pad to Dynadisc. The way I memorize this is you've got baseline, no planes of motion, moving through 1 plane of motion, 2 planes of motion, 3 planes of motion. Any questions on that progression or on those pieces of equipment? You guys feeling good so far?
Oh yeah.
All right. All right. Sorry, I don't know why that was so bad. That's not the voice I expected. All right. Let's take a look at balance stabilization exercises. So now, like I said, we are going to move our clients systematically, right? We got to build a foundation first. So we need to categorize different versions of balance exercises. Because here's the thing. This is a balance exercise. This is called the single leg balance with reach. Right? This is a balance exercise. This is called the single leg lift and chop. Even doing a single leg shoulder press, which can be used as either a balance exercise or you can call it a shoulder exercise. All of those are balance exercises. But so is this, right? The single leg Romanian deadlift, right? That's a balance exercise. Or the single leg squat with touchdown. That's a balance exercise, right? Or here's another one, right? I could do a jump and land on 1 leg and lose my freaking balance, right? That's a balance exercise, right? I can go laterally, and that's a balance exercise, right? All of those are balance exercises. So which one do we give to which client? Well, NASM's got a system. That's where the OPT model comes in, right? Again, we are going to build on our client's foundation. We're going to start with stabilization exercises. We're going to move into strength versions, and we're going to move into power versions. So it's going to look like this for our balance training. You know what I'm going to do, actually? Hold on. I'm going to delete this section and move this over here so that it's easier to see all the ones. So it's going to look like this, right? We're going to have our clients in either stabilization, strength, or power. Well, clients who are in the stabilization level are going to get balance stabilization exercises, right? Now, what the heck is a balance stabilization exercise? How do you know which exercise is which? Well, these are balance exercises that focus on reflexive joint stabilization. These are exercises that are not about moving, they're about not moving, right? That's really what the entire stabilization phase is, right? That's so funny. That's what's so funny about like exercise. Like people think about exercise is all about moving, And a lot of exercise is, like, don't get me wrong, like you're trying to learn how to move heavy weights, right? But a lot of what exercise is, a lot of what training is learning how to limit unwanted movement, you know? Think about like when you look at like a barbell squat, with like a really bad butt wink, right? Let's see if I wonder if I can find a GIF of this. No. Yeah, I'm never gonna be able to. I would have to look up like a really long freaking video. But you'll see clients with like the butt wink, right? Where they're doing their squats. That's totally not it. Yeah, and you see this like really intense like rounding here, right? Like that's stress on the lower back. They getting way too much pelvic movement rather than having the pelvic stability while they are squatting the way they're supposed to, right? They have a lot of movement. They have unwanted movement. That is totally not what we are going for. So how do you spot that's, I always like to say this, but like, how do you spot a balance stabilization exercise in the wild, right? Like, how do you know the difference between a balance stabilization exercise and a balance strength exercise? Like when I was a kid, they taught us this rhyme in school, which has never once come in handy. But it was when like you remember like when they would do like the assemblies and like the animal guy would come and just bring in like a bunch of like exotic animals. We were all taught this like little rhyme, and there's a difference between a coral snake versus a king snake. And a king snake is safe. King snake will not hurt you. They are non-venomous. But a coral snake is really, really dangerous. And the rhyme for this, the way that you can tell the difference, because you look at them, they look exactly the friggin' same, is if red touches yellow, you're a dead fellow. And if red touches black, you're okay, Jack. And I remember thinking as a kid, this is going to save my life someday. And yet this has never once come up in my life. But I still remember that dumb rhyme. You need to be able to spot them in the wild, right? You need to be able to tell the difference. Well, that's the concept that we're looking at here when we're trying to differentiate between stabilization, strength, and power exercises. We need to know what the defining characteristic is that's different between them. So balance stabilization exercises are any balance exercise that involves little to no movement of your balance leg. So if I did something like the single leg balance with reach, right? Actually, we'll start with the most basic balance exercise, the single leg balance, which is literally this: hands on hips, one leg down, and you're gonna lift. This is the single leg balance. This is the most basic balance exercise. And it is a balance stabilization exercise because I am not moving my balance leg, right? I stand on one leg, I do not move, right? Balance stabilization. Now, I could do this, right? What if I start doing this? Right? This is called the single leg balance with reach. This is balance with reach sagittal, balance with reach frontal, balance with reach transverse, right? Each of those are a single leg balance with reach. This is still a balance stabilization exercise. Now, to the naked eye, you might be like, wait a minute, you just said no movement, right? I said no movement of the balance leg. My balance leg is not moving, right? I'm moving my other leg. So this is a balance stabilization exercise. Standing on one leg doing a shoulder press, balance stabilization. Doing a lift and chop, balance stabilization. A bicep curl, a tricep press down, and we've got a cable or something, right? All of those are balance stabilization exercises because my balance leg did not move. So you got the exercise checklist, right? Single leg balance, single leg lift and chop are both on it under the stabilization category. Now, balance strength. Let's say we move our client up a month. They've done this for, they did a month of training. They absolutely rocked it. They're really good at the balance stabilization stuff. Now it is time to move them onto the balance strength stuff. Well, this is where we are going to start doing balance exercises that do involve full range of movement of the balanced leg. So now we are going to do concentric and eccentric movement within my balance leg, right? Balance exercises, full dynamic, eccentric, concentric range of movement of the balanced leg. So if I did something like this, and I'm standing on my left leg, and I got dumbbells in hand or whatever, I could just do a body weight, right? And now I bend at the hip and go down and do a Romanian deadlift, like a single leg Romanian deadlift, right? Something like this. That is moving my balance leg. Therefore, it is a balance strength exercise, and all my strength level clients are going to get that version. Or maybe a single leg, squat touchdown, or a step up to balance, right? I should not do this on my chair, but right, something like that. I am moving this leg through a full range of movement, right? I'm doing a balance exercise. So that is the difference, right? Single leg squat with touchdown, single leg Romanian deadlift, step up to balance, right? All of those exercises are balance strength exercises because the leg is moving, okay? Then, and there we go, right? Single leg squat with touchdown. You'll notice there's not a huge difference between these two, but this is more of a traditional squat. And then here, her chest is much lower. This is more of a deadlifting action. Even though they call it a squat, but it's that's a freaking deadlift. So it kind of depends on what you're prepping for that day. But both these are really good. Then we've got clients who are in the power level, right? And clients who are in the power level, they are going to get balance power exercises. I'm pretty sure you guys are seeing the freaking pattern here by this point. Balance power exercises are balance exercises that involve a full dynamic, concentric, and eccentric range of movement of the balance leg. So that sentence is literally the same, but then we are just tacking this little bit on the end. At functionally applicable speeds, which is NASM's big fancy way of saying fast. So now we are moving our balance leg, but we are moving it fast, right? These are exercises that involve hopping, right? By the way, if you ever wanted to know the difference between jumping and hopping, jumping is 2 legs to 2 legs. Hopping is 1 leg to 1 leg, or 1 leg to your other leg. So that's power, right? Those are balance power exercises. They're moving your leg through a full range of motion, and then they are doing it at a fast speed. So if I did, let's say like a single leg squat, and then I jumped and I landed and balanced afterwards, like stabilized, that is a balance power exercise, right? If I were standing on top of a box and I jumped down and held my landing, that is a balance power exercise. I'm balancing, but I'm doing it very explosively, right? You can see the single leg box hop up with stabilization. Let me see if I can find a picture. See if I can find a good picture of this. And by picture, I of course mean video. So he's standing on, he's gonna jump from, and you actually, I guess you could jump from 2 legs, by the way. You don't have to. You just have to land on 1 leg. But yeah, he's gonna jump with 1 leg, he's gonna land on 1 leg. Right, so that's a balance power exercise. Obviously very, very advanced, right? And that's why power is at the top of the OPT model. This is how, again, we are being progressive, right? We are building a foundation, and then we are building upon that foundation. This is a client who's in phase 5, right? So again, our guide to program design. Select the appropriate exercise for the training phase by either picking stabilization exercises, strength exercises, or power exercises. And then clients who are in phase 1, that corresponds with level 1, And because phase 1 corresponds with level 1, they are going to get balanced stabilization exercises. Clients who are in phases 2, 3, or 4, because that falls within the strength level. So phase 2, 3, and 4 is level 2. They're going to get balanced strength exercises. And clients who are in phase 5 or level 3 are going to get balanced power exercises. And I will say, again, you will notice it says phase 6 here. There is no phase 6 until you buy the PES. Phase 6 is sport specific or maximal power. It's its own thing. And as far as we at Sochi are concerned, it doesn't exist because we don't teach you guys the CES or the PES. We teach you the other ones. Any questions on balance stuff? All right, Lorianne, how you feeling? I always like to check in
Bueno. Thank you.
with new folks. Good?
Yes, sir.
Love it. All right. Let's do the reactive stuff. Okay, so here's the thing. I do want to get this out of the way before we even get started. I like the term reactive. It's what NASM used to, it used to be the only thing that NASM said back in the 3rd edition, so I kind of got used to that back when I got certified a million years ago. So I like the term reactive more than I like the term plyometric, but they are totally interchangeable. They mean the exact same thing. You will hear, and NASM has no rhyme or reason. They still call it reactive. Sometimes they call it plyometric. It's all over the place. So you just have to remember, whenever you hear the word plyometric, it means reactive. Whenever you hear the word reactive, it means plyometric. I like the term plyo because it means explosive, but I prefer the term reactive because it kind of paints a picture as to like why we're training this way. Because it's like, sometimes you'll hear people say, it's like, why would I train like a senior client to be explosive? They're not, sprinting. They're not like, trying to run the Olympics or dunk a basketball or anything like that. Why would I want to do plyometrics with like a senior client? And I tell them, it's about reactivity. Everybody, they may not necessarily be trying to dunk a basketball, but everybody has missed a step. Everybody's stepped off a curb without realizing it or tripped over something, and you've had to respond and eccentrically catch yourself and land. And so like that is reactive, right? That's reactive training. You're learning how to respond to something as explosively as possible to avoid injury. So when people ask me, it's like, would you do reactive exercises with senior clients? I say, yeah, absolutely. Only if they're ready for it. I would never do it unless, it is safe for them. And I would evaluate that beforehand. But I've absolutely done reactive training with plenty of senior clients. And yeah, I've gotten dirty looks before at the gym from people like while I'm training that client. But that client is in the best shape of their life and they're not going to get injured the next time, an Uber driver that's not paying attention almost runs them over and they have to jump out of the way, So our objectives today. We want to describe plyometric training and its purposes, the rationale for doing it, which I kind of just talked about, and then be able to design an effective training program. So what is a plyometric or what is a reactive exercise? Well, it is a quick, powerful movement that involves a rapid eccentric contraction followed immediately by an explosive or rapid concentric contraction. So that's the thing we need to remember here. It's not just the explosive throwing part. I know that like the purpose of most throwing exercises is to get something super far away, right? To take a freaking football and throw it a bunch of yards, right? Totally, absolutely. Or the goal is to jump over a freaking fence, right? I get that the flashy part that we're paying attention to is the explosive sort of unloading concentric part. But that is not all that reactive exercises are. Plyometrics are a series of what we call a stretch shortening cycle. right? Which I told you guys was going to be really important in the PES manual because it's a lot to do with athletics, right? We are going to stretch something so that it loads a bunch of energy into it. That's the eccentric lengthening action, which will cause the concentric explosive shortening action, right? So when he jumps from this box here and lands into this, he is lengthening his glutes. He is lengthening his hamstrings. Well, sort of. He's lengthening his quads and he's lengthening his calf muscles. And then suddenly he is going to shorten all of those things when he goes into a jumping action afterwards. So by doing a rapid stretch, we're going to get a rapid shortening. That's the cycle, right? We need to be able to definitely do this explosive movement in both directions. So we get an eccentric force reduction followed by a concentric force production, right? So that's the cycle, right? So yeah, rapid eccentric lengthening that triggers rapid concentric shortening. By the way, this is an example of what we call a stretch reflex. Your nervous system is what's loading all of this energy in response. So that is a stretch reflex. For those of you who have ever been to the doctor and they've done that thing where they take a hammer and smack you on the knee and your knee kicks forward, that's a stretch reflex. Basically, by smacking your knee, they are hitting the Golgi tendon organ on your rectus femoris, or well, just your quadriceps. And so what happens is your quadriceps thinks that they've been rapidly stretched. So your nervous system goes, holy crap. And so then it contracts your quadriceps muscles. When it contracts, that's why your leg kicks forward. That's a spinal reflex. And it's also a simple reflex. So there's not a lot of control here, which is one of the biggest reasons why we need to make sure that we train with proper form so that our body can do it properly without having to think about doing it properly. Spinal reflexes are when a stimulus is so intense that rather than, it's still taking place at your central nervous system, but rather than traveling up your spine to your brain and then back down to wherever it's going, it gets to the spine. And when the stimulus is so intense, your spine goes, oh, that's intense. And it makes the decision before your brain can. That way it doesn't have to waste any time, traveling all the way up. So spinal reflexes are very, very simple reflexes. That's why you don't really have a lot of control when you get smacked on the knee and that happens. So plyometric training, which uses these stretch shortening cycles, is going to be a great way to enhance like motor learning. Remember, motor learning is how your brain is basically learning specific movement patterns. It's also another really great way to develop neuromuscular efficiency, recruiting the right muscle at the right time for the right amount of force. And it actually promotes muscle excitability and sensitivity, which is cool. So we're talking about the idea of like reactivity here. Think about like what running is, right? Like when you're jogging, you're flying through the air for just a second, right? Like the difference between walking and running. Walking, there is always one foot in contact with the ground at all times. Running, there is a moment where both feet are up off the ground. And then all of a sudden your foot touches the ground, and that's when it starts recruiting the muscles in your toes, then your foot, then your calf, and your shin, then up to the hamstrings and quads, right? Up to the glutes, up to your core. And it does all that the second you hit the ground, right? If you've ever jumped in your life, right, the second you land, your muscles are like flying through the air, and then all of a sudden you hit the ground and they have to recruit all of the sudden and stabilize, otherwise you're going to crumple like a sack of potatoes. So we are looking for plyometric training to enhance your muscles excitability so they can do this rapidly, sensitivity so that they can do it really rapidly, and reactivity so that they can do it really rapidly, right? We're basically trying to get your nervous system more sensitive so it can turn on faster. Basically, in a nutshell, plyometric training enhances your body's ability to respond to ground reaction forces. It teaches your nervous system how to turn everything on as fast as possible. It's running a fire drill, that's really, really, really great because that's exactly what we're looking for when it comes to keeping our clients safe. Again, this is why we do plyometric training and why it's actually so good for you. So this is going to enhance your rate of force production as well. AKA, this is going to enhance your level of power, which is pretty important for like athletes, right? So we're going to see a greater motor unit recruitment. More of your nervous system is going to be able to recruit more muscle fibers. We're going to see a faster rate coding or motor unit firing rate. So your nervous system is going to learn how to fire more quickly. And we're going to see a greater amount of motor unit synchronization, which is all of those different neurons firing simultaneously, which is going to give you a more powerful contraction. You know, when we think of like motor unit synchronization, that when all of your fibers are able to recruit simultaneously, you get a lot more power rather than one recruiting really hard and then resting while the other one recruits really hard and they're out of sync, right? You're going to lose power if you do that. Plyometric training that's very explosive gets your nervous system to be better in sync. So very applicable to sports. You know, we're a really big fan of plyometrics when it comes to sports. A lot of sports are basically built on who can do whichever activity the fastest. And so we think about like how most athletics are, they're a series of stretch shortening cycles. Think about like a baseball pitcher, right? The reason they do that whole like wind up, right? Like when you think about like an MLB pitcher, right? They do a step back. That is lengthening certain muscles, which allow them to have more power here. And that allows them to like do this like big heavy throw, right? Like going through like that entire process, they are creating a whole bunch of momentum and they're creating stretching, which creates rapid shortening in the opposite direction. When you think about like an NFL player who's like snapping a ball, right? They get the ball into their hands. So it's not snapping, but throwing a ball, right? They get it, they load, and then they fire rather than just like running around holding it like this, right? Or like if you think about like an NBA player who's like jumping, they throw their arms and then they reach up, right? They load so that they can rapidly unload. Plyometric training is really, really obviously quite great for enhancing your ability to be a better athlete. It's going to prepare you for, you know, whatever is in your sport. And that's why the exercises that we're going to choose, if we're talking about training actual athletes, are usually very specific movement patterns that are specific to whatever our client's like sport actually is, right? Rapid changes of direction, depending on what the athlete, you know, like if it's a hockey player, you're probably going to use one of those explosive, like ice skating exercises, right? Where they do that super explosive, very rapid side to side movement. Or maybe you'll use like a slide board or something. You know, specific movement patterns that are specific to whatever your sport is. If you're a golfer, you're going to do a lot of like rotational explosive movements, right? Rapid changes of directions. And obviously we're doing this in fast motion.
Centric and releasing concentric.
Oh, Lorianne, you're unmuted. Do you have a question?
Sorry.
Tap your button. No worries. So 3 phases here. 3 phases to any plyometric, right? There is the eccentric phase, which you can think of as the loading phase, right? Like I said, this is triggering your stretch reflex, right? This is the rapid lengthening of your muscle, which triggers your nervous system to go, whew, man, we're rapidly lengthening. We could tear if we do that, right? So then it decides to concentrically contract in the exact opposite direction. And that's where you get your unloading phase. So when we look at a stretch shortening cycle, it starts with the eccentric loading, right? Think about like doing a jump. This is where like I'm going to load by throwing my arms down, right? That triggers the stretch reflex that we talked about due to how fast that is happening. So this is one of the things that we got to talk about when it comes to doing an actual explosive jump. You know, you don't want to do your jumps like this, right? This big slow movement on the way down, followed by trying to do a fast movement on the way up. What we want to do is we want to go rapid in both directions. I want to throw my arms down and go rapid down so that I can go rapid up, okay? The faster I load, the faster I can unload, right? Because that gives me a better stretch shortening cycle. The more I can make my nervous system panic, by rapidly lengthening a muscle, the more explosive my unloading is going to be. Now, in between the loading and the unloading, there is the transitionary phase in between. Now, think about this in terms of like a normal lift, right? Like, let's say I grab, like I'm doing a deadlift, right? Just like a classic deadlift, and I'm doing this wrong in this example. Let's say I start from the rack rather than starting from the floor. Don't do that, it's a bad habit. But let's say I do, right? So I grab it off the rack and I've got the barbell in hand. My first step through this movement is going to be the eccentric movement. So I'm going to lengthen as I go down, right? So now I've like lengthened on the way down, and then I do maybe like a little isometric, and then I come right back up, right? So maybe I do it at this kind of slow tempo here, and then up, right? So I did eccentric, I had a little isometric at the bottom, and I had concentric on the way up. So that's the order that we went in, right? Eccentric first, isometric second, concentric third in a traditional lift. Now, in plyometrics, we don't want to have an isometric. We do not want to have any pausing between the loading and the unloading. Because the longer we pause, the more our nervous system learns that it's actually not in danger. So you don't have that strong contraction in the opposite direction. You lose power, right? So instead, we don't call it isometric in between. We call it amortization. This is the transitionary phase. We want amortization to be as short as possible because the shorter it is, the more explosive we will be during the unloading phase. So if we rapidly lengthen and we transition quickly, we will have a more explosive unloading. Our contraction phase will be much, much more powerful. Does that make sense to everybody? That's probably the key concept from this chapter. Everybody good on that?
Yeah.
Cool, cool. All right, so physiologically what's happening here, like I said, you are basically tricking your nervous system into thinking it's in danger. You are getting those muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs to both freak out a little bit, which we're kind of taking advantage of, right? So when we rapidly lengthen the muscle, your Golgi tendon organ and your muscle spindles are both going to go, holy crap, lots of tension. And the muscle spindle is going, holy crap, lots of length, right? So it thinks that if you're going so quickly, you know, it's like a 10-foot giant is ripping your arm off, you know, like it's like moving you too quickly. So it's trying to protect you by shortening that muscle back to like a normal shortened position. So it contracts, and that's the sort of principle that's happening here. And so physiologically, you're taking advantage of proprioception. You're also taking advantage of the fact that like your muscles are somewhat elastic. They're kind of like rubber bands, right? So by doing, you know, imagine stretching a rubber band out and then letting it go. You are rapidly lengthening it, and then you're allowing it to rapidly shorten in the opposite direction by releasing all of that stored energy. But imagine if you stretch that rubber band out and you just held it there for like an hour. It's going to lose some of its elastic properties because you are basically like holding it in this lengthened position, and it's getting used to that new lengthened position. Your muscles are kind of similar to that, which is another reason why we want to be explosive in our lengthening and in our transitions. We want both those things to be super fast and super explosive. So in summary, the proposed mechanism for enhancing your athletic explosiveness, the faster loading, the greater force you will have, okay? Now, one thing we need to be aware of is that we do not want to have increased inhibition of your muscles. This is one of the reasons why we do not want to do a lot of stretching when we are also trying to be explosive, at least not a lot of static stretching. Static stretching is big, long eccentric holds, and that decreases the sensitivity of the muscles, allowing for a greater range of movement, but a decreased explosiveness and decreased force production of your muscles. And that's definitely not something that we want, right? So the sort of mechanism for this, right, is that we are going to get enhanced neuromuscular efficiency by ensuring that, yes, we are doing a little bit of flexibility training, but we're doing the right type of flexibility training. If I'm trying to be super explosive, I don't want to do static stretches. And that's why we have our static, active, and dynamic stretches. It depends on how you are recruiting your muscles. So you're going to see the same thing we said last time. Plyometric training, we need to make sure that it is an integrated approach. We want to make sure that we are focusing on like multiple factors, multiple planes of motion. We're making sure that it's systematic and progressive. Build a foundation first and then build upon that foundation. By the way, training plyometrics in isolation hasn't necessarily been shown to see like massive amounts of improvement. Like sometimes we will see people will focus on just plyometric training all by itself and they'll just do jumping. And that hasn't been shown to be super effective. And we'll talk more about like why that is when we get to the resistance section. I think we're going to get to that on Thursday, I want to say. But if we are training plyometrics in isolation, you end up, when we look at like what power is, power is sort of an equation here. It is force times velocity. Actually, I'm not really seeing what I want. But basically, this is the equation for power. It's power equals force times velocity. Plyometrics work on velocity. They don't really work on force because most of the time this is going to be, jumping with body weight, which means, very, very low force. So we actually do see that sometimes like training your plyometrics by themselves won't necessarily enhance performance. You do want to make sure this is part of a fully integrated training program that also is going to address the force side of the equation through like, resistance training. That will come up better. I'll have a much better explanation for that on Thursday. It is safe for children, by the way. That's one thing, and seniors alike, depending, as long as it is based on the client. We are not just like saying, oh, it's a youth, we shouldn't do this intense stuff. Oh, it's a senior, we shouldn't do this hard stuff. Like that's not what we're looking at. We're looking at the client themselves. We perform a valid fitness assessment so that we can determine whether or not it is safe for them to do these movements. And we do know that plyometric training actually may reduce your risk of injury. I know this is a more challenging category of exercises, but it actually has been shown to reduce your risk of injury. Again, it's kind of like I talked about, you don't really see people get hurt in the gym that often. They get hurt at home, because the gym is slightly dangerous, and I think people are aware of that. So then they take more caution to keep themselves safe. There's my favorite book is called Born to Run. It's about ultra marathoning. And there's a really famous race in Colorado called the Leadville 100. And it is a 100-mile trail run that starts as high as where airplanes like pressurize. So it is a super intense. Look at this. Look at like this huge peak right here, and then like majorly down, like pretty. And then it's and the reason this is symmetrical, this actually isn't fully accurate. This is if the race was like start to finish. It actually is you race to here and then you race back. But they just copied it on both sides. So it's 50 miles out and 50 miles back. And it is super high elevation. And no one has ever died doing this race. It's in the winter, by the way. No one has ever died doing the Leadville 100, even though it's very, very, very intense. And they asked the one of the guys who kind of like runs it why he thinks that is. And he's like, it's too intense. Like people, usually beats you into submission before you ever get into danger. Most people give up before they ever get to a place where they can actually hurt themselves. I kind of feel the same way about plyometric training. I feel like, it is a challenging, risky type of exercise. And so as long as you are building a foundation first, you are going to make sure that your client is safe and they're going to take it seriously and they're going to be careful. It is an advanced training tool. Make no mistake about it. It is advanced. But I also think that it can be for anyone. You need to make sure always that you are making sure that your client is safe. They have proper flexibility. If they don't have proper flexibility, they can't do a good squat. It's not for them. If they need to have proper core strength. If they don't have proper core strength, this is not for them. If they don't have proper balance, this is not for them, right? That is why we want to make sure that we address all of those things before ever putting our client through a stretch shortening, a plyometric program. So focus on, now when you are doing this, focus on shortening your amortization. The shorter your amortization is, the transitionary period, the more explosive you're going to be. And how do you progress this? Again, ask most people how you progress stuff in the gym. They will tell you make it heavier, right? Do more reps. Not necessarily. In plyometrics, the goal is to be more explosive. So how do we progress it? Well, we make it more explosive. We give them a greater distance to jump or a greater height to jump to, or we move from doing a double leg exercise to doing a single leg exercise. And that will focus on, improving their explosivity. One thing to be aware of, make sure you are always monitoring the number of foot contacts. Look at your program, monitor how many times they are doing this explosive stuff. This is very high impact, which means it is harder on the joints. So depending on the athlete, if they're doing like a lot of plyometrics and a lot of like speed, agility, quickness training, like speed ladders and things like that, that may be pretty advanced. You may have to take it easy there. So be cautious with that. So when it comes to designing this program, looking at the OPT model, if our client is in the stabilization level, well, guess what? We are going to focus on plyometric stabilization exercises or reactive stabilization exercises. These are exercises that, when you are looking at them, if you want to spot them in the wild, right, they involve little to no movement upon landing. So the goal with plyometric stabilization exercises is actually not even to increase how high they can jump. The goal is actually to enhance how well they can land. We are looking to focus on landing mechanics and little to no movement upon landing. So this is where there's a difference between like the box jump and the box jump with stabilization. So the box jump with stabilization should look something like this. She's going to land and she's going to hold that landing for 3 to 5 seconds. By the way, NASA made this video and this girl totally does not hold her landings long enough. Drives me a little crazy every time I show it, but she should be holding her landings for about 3 to 5 seconds. Boom, pause, 2, 3, stand. So we are teaching our client how to do a landing mechanic. That's the difference between a box jump and a box jump to stabilization, right? So she'll jump, she'll hold her landings for 3 to 5 seconds and step back down. She's getting better at landing. Now, if she lands with her feet turned out, we're going to tell her to adjust. If she lands straddled, we're going to tell her to adjust. Excessive lean, tell her to adjust, right? This gives us an opportunity to get our client to like become aware and try to land in those specific positions that we're aiming for. Here's a lateral box jump to stabilization. We could do a tuck jump to stabilization, which would involve just is that actually up here? So the tuck jump, she drives her knees in. There we go. Now she's holding her landings, right? In fact, this girl's killing it. This is great, right? So she holds her landings for 3 to 5 seconds, right? So there's a difference between that version, which is a tuck jump with stabilization, right? Where, again, little to no movement upon landing, versus clients who move into the strength level, and they are going to get plyometric or reactive strength exercises, okay? These are reactive exercises that move through a full range of motion at a repeating tempo. So this is now focusing on learning how to transition from lengthening to shortening, right? We are not stabilizing anymore. We are learning how to do that amortization, okay? So level 2 clients, phases 2, 3, and 4, are going to perform reactive strength exercises. These are exercises that involve a full dynamic, eccentric, concentric range of movement at a repeating tempo. We are learning how to transition from lengthen to shorten. So take a look here, right? This is the chuck jump with stabilization. Stabilization clients hold their landings 3 to 5 seconds. She's not really learning how to transition from one to the other. Versus this version, this is a repeat tuck jump. This is what we would give a client in the strength level. She's going to focus on transitioning from one to the other. So she tucks, goes right into the next one. So she's learning how to transition right into her next repetition. Okay, that's the difference from one to the other. So we are focusing on that stretch. We're learning how to stretch and we're learning how to shorten, right? So full range of movement, repetitive tempo. A good example would be repeat squat jumps or maybe lunge jumps. And you're just going to sort of transition back and forth. Going from one into the next, right? No pausing in between. That's a great example of a reactive strength exercise. And lastly, we've got clients who are in the power level. This is all about maximal force production. This is really focusing on like as much reactivity and explosiveness as possible. So this is reactive power, which is like basically means like plyometric power. It's like power plus power. These are reactive exercises that are performed absolutely as fast as possible. Your body needs to be forced into rapid eccentric deceleration. So the best example of this, like this is close, but the problem is there's some air time there, right? But if you look at like ice skaters, well, he's not moving very fast. Man, I can never find a good ice skater example. I really just want to find the that's pretty good. That's somewhat fast. So here's the thing. This version is a reactive power. Now, it doesn't look tempo-wise like there's a huge difference between like the lunge jumps and these ice skaters, but here's the difference, right? The lunge jumps, you can focus on jumping as high as you can, which gives you some air time. Whereas with this version, the faster you do one, the faster you can do the next. He's actually forcing himself into each repetition. Another really good example of this would be bounding. So bounding as an exercise is a really great, super explosive, reactive power exercise because you're basically going to move. The faster you do one, the faster you're going to do the other. Do you literally not do an example? Oh my God. Like we get to the last like 10 seconds of the video, he covers it up with an ad. That's a great example of bounding. Bounding is basically super big, explosive, exaggerated jumps. The faster he does one, the faster he can do the next, right? And there's a lot of variations of bounding, right? That's a really good example. There's also, it's still just kind of the classic. This guy, I've seen this guy do other versions too. Here's a really good one. This has a bunch of variations of bounding. So there's the classic, right? Left to right to left to right. Rapid eccentric deceleration, right? And then there is this version here. We can see he's actually like more explosively snapping his leg back. every time. That's a really good one for hamstring. That's kind of a fun one where he actually keeps his arms in front of himself and he's doing a single leg bound. That is a really good example of reactive power. And then he goes like right, right, left, left. That's kind of a fun variation. So there's a lot of like bounding is honestly, in my opinion, the best example. Or ice skaters. A depth jump is another really good one. A depth jump forces you into rapid eccentric deceleration. So you can see here, he does a regular depth jump, then he goes into a depth jump to forward jump, and then he does depth jump to bounding, which is like really advanced. But the depth jump is just a great reactive power movement because it actually involves that rapid eccentric deceleration. So he starts on top, jumps, and does, he's doing a little tiny one there. They're definitely ramping this video up. And here's a depth jump to box jump. So, right? So it's a classic example of that stretch shortening cycle. Those are all really good examples of reactive power. And it's just moving a little bit more explosively. So again, right, we are gonna, with our client, move them through stabilization. If your client's in phase 1, that means they're in the stabilization level. They're gonna get plyometric stabilization exercises. Phase 2, 3, and 4, that means they're in the strength level. They're gonna get plyometric strength. Phase 5, level 3, they're gonna get plyometric power. And then there is phase 6, that would be very sport specific stuff. And that is your guide. So undoing everything I changed in this little picture here, you can see this is our entire guide to movement prep here, right? Clients in the stabilization level get core stabilization, balance stabilization, and plyometric stabilization. Clients in the strength level get core strength, balance strength, and plyometric strength. Clients in the power level get core power, balance power, and plyometric power. The differences between these are little to no movement of the spine, little to no movement of the balance leg, and whoops, I went up. Little to no movement of the spine, little to no movement of the balance leg, and little to no movement upon landing. Strength exercises are full movement of the spine, full movement of the balance leg, and full repeated movement of an explosive exercise. And then the core power, full movement of the spine explosively, full movement of the balance leg explosively, and full movement as fast as possible and explosively. Power plus power. And that is your entire guide to movement prep over 2 days. Any questions or comments today, guys? How's everybody feeling?
Great. I'm great.
Cool.
I feel explosive.
Awesome. You're like, I'm going to jump out of my chair once this is over. Love that. All right, guys. Well, thank you for bearing with me. For those of you who came back for round 2 today, I apologize for spectrums and competencies.
Thanks, Brad.
Yeah. Tomorrow we're going to do SAQ, which is kind of fun. We don't get to do SAQ a lot. We really only cover it in the sports mod and in the youth mod. So it'll be really fun. We get to talk about like speed ladder drills and stuff, which is all the stuff that we're going to do when we get together next week. Yeah, that is about all I have got for you. I'm going to let you out of here and I'll see you guys tomorrow.